In the high summer of 1683, the fate of an entire continent hung suspended over the fortified walls of a single besieged city. To the east, an empire at the absolute zenith of its territorial might mobilized a war machine of unprecedented scale, intent on claiming the ultimate strategic prize, the city they called the Golden Apple. To the west lay a fractured, bickering mosaic of kingdoms and principalities, exhausted by decades of internal religious strife and seemingly incapable of unified resistance. If the Habsburg capital of Vienna fell, the geographic gateway to Central Europe would be torn wide open, and the political, cultural, and religious map of the world would be rewritten forever. This was not merely a clash of rival armies over a border dispute, but an existential collision of civilizations that would dictate the future of the modern world. The Ottoman Empire had spent centuries steadily pushing its frontiers deeper into the European landmass. From the shattering fall of Constantinople in 1453 to the conquest of the Balkans and the bloody subjugation of Hungary, their advance seemed as inevitable as the rising tide. The Sublime Porte, the central government of the empire, possessed a military apparatus that was the absolute terror of its neighbors. Their logistical networks could sustain massive hosts across vast, unforgiving distances, while their elite infantry, the Janissaries, represented the pinnacle of disciplined professional soldiering in the early modern era. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, a man of boundless ambition and unyielding ruthlessness, recognized a fleeting window of geopolitical opportunity. The Holy Roman Empire, led by Emperor Leopold I, was severely distracted and vulnerable. France, under the aggressive leadership of King Louis XIV, was relentlessly pressing its borders in the west, tying down Habsburg military resources and political capital. Furthermore, a Protestant uprising in Habsburg-controlled Hungary, led by Imre Thököly, actively sought Ottoman assistance against the Catholic Emperor. Sensing this profound weakness, Kara Mustafa assembled a colossal force numbering well over 150,000 combatants and camp followers, dragging heavy siege artillery across the grueling terrain of the Balkans. His objective was absolute conquest. As the Ottoman vanguard darkened the horizon in early July, utter panic gripped Vienna. Emperor Leopold I, along with his royal court and tens of thousands of terrified citizens, fled westward, leaving the defense of the city in the hands of a hardened, uncompromising military veteran, Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. Starhemberg possessed a meager garrison of roughly 15,000 regular soldiers and 8,000 civilian volunteers. Knowing the overwhelming odds, he ordered the immediate destruction of the suburbs outside the city walls, a ruthless, scorched earth policy designed to deny the approaching enemy any cover, timber, or resources. The Ottoman host arrived and immediately enveloped the city, constructing an encampment that rivaled Vienna itself in size, complexity, and population. Kara Mustafa chose not to rely solely on a costly frontal assault against the massive stone bastions, nor did he want to wait for a lengthy starvation blockade to take effect. Instead, he initiated a sophisticated, terrifying campaign of subterranean warfare. Ottoman sappers, highly skilled military engineers, began digging a vast, intricate network of trenches and underground tunnels toward the city's primary defensive fortifications. Their goal was to pack these claustrophobic tunnels with massive quantities of black powder and detonate them, bringing the mighty walls crashing down into the moat. Inside the fortifications, the reality of the siege rapidly deteriorated into a waking nightmare of attrition. The summer heat became oppressive, turning the packed city into an incubator for disease. Dysentery began to claim significantly more lives than Ottoman musket fire or artillery bombardment. Food supplies dwindled rapidly, forcing the desperate defenders to consume horses, stray cats, and vermin just to survive another day. Yet Starhemberg maintained iron discipline, executing deserters without hesitation and constantly organizing frantic repairs to the crumbling masonry. The defenders fought a desperate, bloody war in the dark beneath the earth, Habsburg counterminers listened frantically for the muffled sounds of digging, intercepting Ottoman sappers in claustrophobic subterranean skirmishes. In pitch-black tunnels, barely wide enough for a man to crawl, soldiers butchered each other with pickaxes, spades, and short blades, desperately trying to defuse the massive explosive charges before they could be detonated. Despite their heroics, massive sections of the outer defenses, including the crucial Berg Ravelin, were eventually pulverized by Ottoman mines, leaving the inner walls dangerously exposed. While Vienna slowly bled to death, a frantic diplomatic scramble was unfolding across the broader European theater. Pope Innocent XI recognized the catastrophic cascading implications of Vienna's potential fall. He poured vast sums of money from the Vatican treasury into forging a fragile, unprecedented alliance known as the Holy League, desperately trying to unite bitter European rivals against the common existential threat. The absolute linchpin of this alliance was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, ruled by King Jan III Sobieski, a battle-hardened monarch with a formidable, terrifying reputation for fighting Ottoman forces. Sobieski understood with crystal clarity that if Vienna fell, his own kingdom would inevitably be the next target of the Ottoman war machine. Despite facing intense internal political opposition and the logistical nightmare of mobilizing his heavy forces, he honored his treaty obligations with the Holy Roman Empire. Leaving his own borders dangerously exposed to potential incursions, he marched his army south with astonishing speed. This was a monumental strategic gamble, one that required coordinating the complex movements of Polish, Austrian, Bavarian, and Saxon troops into a single cohesive relief force before the city capitulated. By early September, the situation inside Vienna was entirely critical. The defenders were exhausted beyond measure, their ammunition was nearly depleted, and a final, overwhelming Ottoman assault through the breached walls seemed imminent and unstoppable. But just as all hope was evaporating in the suffocating heat, the unified Christian Relief Army, numbering roughly 74,000 highly trained men, arrived in the dense, rugged Vienna woods overlooking the besieged city. Command of the combined forces was entrusted to Sobieski, acknowledging both his royal status and his unmatched tactical pedigree in fighting Eastern armies. The terrain heavily favored the arriving defenders. The Vienna woods were steep, heavily forested, and incredibly difficult to navigate, especially for heavy cavalry and artillery trains. Kara Mustafa, arrogant and entirely dismissive of the approaching relief force, made a fatal, compounding strategic error. He kept the vast bulk of his elite janissaries down in the siege trenches, obsessively focused on delivering the final crushing blow to the city, and sent only a fraction of his army to face the combined Christian forces forming on the heights of the Kahlenberg. The dawn of September 12, 1683, broke over a landscape primed for total slaughter. The battle commenced with grueling, close-quarters infantry engagements on the rugged, uneven slopes. Imperial troops under the command of Charles of Lorraine pushed aggressively on the left flank, systematically clearing Ottoman defensive positions village by village, vineyard by vineyard. The fighting was vicious, chaotic, and relentlessly brutal, characterized by intense, point-blank musket volleys and desperate hand-to-hand combat. The Ottoman troops, suddenly forced to fight a massive battle on two completely separate fronts, struggled to maintain their tactical cohesion. As the day wore on, the disciplined Christian infantry steadily forced the Ottoman lines back toward the flat plains surrounding the encampment. But the decisive, history-altering blow was yet to be struck. Hidden in the dense forests on the right flank, the heavy cavalry of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had spent the entire day slowly, painstakingly navigating the treacherous terrain. These were the legendary Winged Hussars, an elite force renowned across the continent for their devastating heavy cavalry shock tactics. They were heavily armored and adorned with large wooden frames bearing eagle or ostrich feathers that created a terrifying, unearthly rushing sound as they charged into battle. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Sobieski observed that the Ottoman center was severely wavering, disorganized and exhausted by the relentless infantry pressure from the left. He ordered the cavalry to deploy. Emerging from the tree line, nearly 18,000 horsemen, representing the largest single cavalry charge in recorded human history, formed up on the ridges. At the absolute center of this massive armored fist rode Jan III Sobieski himself. With a thunderous roar that shook the earth, the cavalry surged down the slopes, a tidal wave of lances, steel, and charging war horses. The physical impact was apocalyptic. The Winged Hussars shattered the exhausted and demoralized Ottoman lines upon first contact. The sheer kinetic energy of the charge broke the enemy formations instantly, driving deep into the heart of the Ottoman camp. Panic cascaded through the Ottoman ranks like wildfire, transforming an orderly, entrenched defense into a chaotic, catastrophic rout. The troops abandoned their weapons, their artillery, and their colossal, opulent encampment, fleeing eastward in a desperate, disorganized bid for survival. The siege was violently and definitively broken. The relief forces swept into the massive Ottoman camp, discovering a staggering accumulation of imperial wealth, advanced weapons, and vital supplies. The contrast was absolute. The transition from the brink of total annihilation to overwhelming victory achieved in a single blood-soaked afternoon. Sobieski, surveying the captured tents of the Grand Vizier and paraphrasing Julius Caesar, famously declared in a letter to the Pope, "We came, we saw, God conquered." For Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, the unprecedented defeat was an unmitigated disaster that carried a fatal, inescapable price. He managed to escape the carnage of the battlefield and retreat to Belgrade, desperately attempting to salvage his fractured, humiliated army. But the Sultan, Mehmed IV, was entirely unforgiving of such a monumental strategic failure. By December of that same year, silent emissaries from the Sultan arrived in Belgrade bearing a silken cord. Kara Mustafa was executed by strangulation, paying the ultimate penalty for his arrogance and his catastrophic strategic overreach. The lifting of the siege was not merely a brilliant defensive triumph. It was the immediate catalyst for a massive, sustained geopolitical offensive. The stunning victory at Vienna galvanized the Christian powers of Europe, proving that the Ottoman war machine could be decisively broken. The Holy League, rather than dissolving after the immediate threat had passed, transitioned into a relentless, coordinated campaign known as the Great Turkish War. Over the next 16 years, imperial armies systematically pushed the Ottoman forces out of Hungary, Transylvania, and large swaths of the fiercely contested Balkans. The psychological aura of Ottoman invincibility was permanently shattered on the slopes of the Kallenberg. The military machine that had terrorized the European continent for centuries was suddenly, violently forced onto the defensive. The empire's logistical limitations and its fatal failure to adapt to rapidly evolving European military technologies and infantry doctrines became glaringly apparent to the world. While the Ottoman Empire would endure as a major power for centuries more, its era of aggressive, unchecked territorial expansion into the heart of Europe was definitively and irrevocably over. Conversely, the successful defense of Vienna marked the dawn of absolute Habsburg hegemony in Central Europe. The Austrian Habsburgs emerged from the ashes of the conflict not just as desperate survivors, but as a dominant, aggressive imperial power. The vast territories reclaimed from the retreating Ottomans vastly expanded their empire, providing the immense economic resources and strategic depth that would sustain their influence through the subsequent centuries of European conflict and statecraft. The events of 1683 represent a profound, undeniable hinge point in human history. Had the Ottoman mind succeeded merely days earlier, had the fragile coalition of the relief force fractured, or had the immense cavalry charge failed to break the lines, the cultural, religious, and political trajectory of the entire continent would have been radically altered. The Siege of Vienna stands as a grim testament to the brutal, unforgiving realities of early modern warfare, the immense weight of strategic alliances, and the sheer unpredictability of history. The monumental clash did not just save a single fortified city, it violently closed one era of imperial expansion and birthed another, redefining the borders and the balance of power in a world forever changed.